And they caught him. Right before he was facing retrial, he said, "I'll tell you about the Rampart scandal in exchange for a much reduced sentence."
It was true as well that while Ray Perez was completely out of hand, so was the whole division.
So far as we know, what he told the police was true. To a very large extent, the details of what he disclosed have been corroborated. And so, in that sense, it's a really good thing, because we did learn about the Rampart scandal. Perez benefited from it. He got a lot less sentence than he would have otherwise for the crimes he committed.
Here was a police officer who was very highly regarded, who had stolen 8 kilos of cocaine and had framed someone.
So it was really hard to have this very dirty cop running around pointing to other people who had committed crimes that were not as serious as his. And the investigators really bridled at having to follow his lead through this maze of misconduct.
The crash unit, the way we saw it in our community was that it was a bunch of cops that were out there that didn't have to be accountable to nobody. So every time we were either framed, that drugs were planting at us, we would speak out in the courtroom saying, I was framed, but they had the law that was protecting them and a badge. So whatever we said, was not going to be heard.
The cops were rarely challenged in court. They would bring in some ugly cases with totally fabricated evidence, and the lawyers would be hollering about how this was going on, and the judges would just say, sorry, this guy's going down, and send these people to prison on trumped up charges.
The police operate as part of the criminal justice system. Police misconduct occurs often because other participants in the criminal justice system look the other way. The reality is that some of the judges knew that the testimony made no sense from officers like Rafael Perez and Nino Durden. Some of the prosecutors knew that they were using testimony from individuals that wasn't credible.
The whole system was going along with what was going on the street, backing up the crash unit, and making a hero of Ray Perez. And so you had this cycle going on.
If I can tell one instance, it's the story of Javier Ovando. He was an individual who had the mistake of getting in a verbal altercation with Rafael Perez and Nino Durden. They shot him in the back, they planted a gun on him, and they said that he was threatened by them. Rafael Perez and Nino Durden changed their testimony literally on the day of trial. The defense lawyer asked for a continuance, and the judge refused the continuance.
And in the end, Ovando, he took a deal. He took a deal for, I think it was something like 23 years, because he knew nobody was going to believe him. And that was a tragedy of it, because he was an illegal alien, because he was a gangbanger. He was placed in that position where he was literally framed.
Perez then later admitted that he had lied, that the gun had been planted on Ovando, that they had shot Ovando. Ovando was released from prison. He's paralyzed for life because of the shooting. Got a large settlement from the city that can never compensate him. But the judge in that case had to have reason to suspect that Perez and Durden weren't telling the truth. The prosecutor had to have reasons, but it was always easier for them to look the other way.
Gun planning was a big thing. Officers would carry spare guns sometimes, and if something went sideways, say there was a bad shooting, or you wanted to get a certain gangbanger to get him off the streets, and you plant a gun on them. And many times they'd be saying, that wasn't mine, yet the officer would be snickering, yes, it is yours, you're going to jail.
It's perfectly possible to frame a guilty man, right? And it's just because, you're framing somebody and you're doing all this illegal stuff around them, but that doesn't make them an innocent. But that doesn't mean it should happen. And I think that there was sort of a lack of real outcry, and I think certain people just were like, well, they probably did a bunch of stuff wrong anyway at some point in their lives. These are not good people. These are gang members, and they're criminals. And if the police cut corners here, it's because, but they got them locked up, and isn't that the end game?
We saw in the Rampart scandal a significant number of innocent people plead guilty to crimes that they didn't commit. And this is a window into a pretty significant problem in the criminal justice system that transcends the Rampart scandal. The reality is that an innocent person faces the possibility of things that they're told, you go to trial, maybe it's a third strike, it's life in prison, maybe there's a mandatory minimum. Plead guilty to a lesser offense and you're out in 3 to 5 years. You face 25 years if you go to trial, 3 to 5 years if you don't. Even if you didn't commit the crime, there's real pressure to plead guilty. And that happened to a lot of people who pled guilty as a result of the Rampart scandal.
That was a big problem with Rampart, is when the victims are all gangbangers, nobody cares, and nobody's interested in what that might mean or what that says about the LAPD or says about society. It all gets very complicated, and hey, so the cops got a little rough with the bad guys. That's what we want them to do.
In those days, there was a lot of cops that actually did their job. A lot of cops that were abiding citizens of this society doing their work. They used to actually arrest you, put the handcuffs on you, read you your rights, and that was it. But there was those that were really rotten that actually, yes, they used to target you. They knew who was selling the dope. They knew who was, making money.
We would set up an observation post in a building and watch these guys sell their drugs. We would see where they would stash it, and we would call in officers to make the arrest. Sometimes, however, we wouldn't find the drugs. And that was a source of frustration with us, that, hey, we wanted to catch these guys, because you would see the main shot caller sometimes. He would be there watching. He wouldn't have any money. He wouldn't have any drugs. He'd just kind of be there, the veterano, the old-timer guy, just watching what was going on. And we would watch him, and he'd have this big old smile on his face, kind of a smirk, as if, I'm getting over on you guys.
They couldn't get rid of the problem. There was a lot going on. There was not too many resources when it came down to dealing with the gang issue, the drug issue, the addiction issue. So a lot of cops, I strongly believe that they were frustrated of catching somebody on the street that maybe they had a grudge against and wanted them off the street, and the only way that they could put them away is by planting drugs on them, altering the report.
Sometimes what would happen is a case would be fabricated, or a case would be put on that person to teach him a lesson and to get him off the street. And we'd watch this person as he was taken to jail and protesting his innocence, and of course nobody would believe him, and he would go to prison, to jail for a lie.
It's very difficult to ask police to aggressively fight gang crime but stay scrupulously within the bounds of the law. It's easy to understand the temptations at times to exceed the bounds of the law, to achieve the goal of getting dangerous people off the streets. But once the police begin taking the law into their own hands, it's a very quick path to what happened with officers like Perez and Durden. Stealing the drugs and selling them themselves, planting evidence on innocent people, lying in court to gain convictions. And then there really is no longer the kind of line between right and wrong that our country depends on.
A lot of them used to actually would chase you down. Sometimes they would beat you, take your drugs, and let you go.
What are they going to do with the drugs that they took from us? I mean, they're obviously going to not go and put it in an evidence room, because obviously they will have to have the person that were carrying that drug in the report.
Officers would sometimes have extra narcotics on their person, on their possession, that they would plant on the person that they had designated was going to be going to jail.
We knew that this crash unit had become corrupt, and our part in the gang was that we knew that they were corrupt, and we had to play ball. We had to play the game in the way that they were playing it. So they will pick us up sometimes as order to teach us a lesson. They will take us into another rival gang community.
We're standing on 18th Street right here. This is 18th Street. You go down the street on 7th, that's Crazy Riders. So what they used to actually do is if they knew you and they had actually stopped you in the past, or maybe knew who you were, they actually used to pick you up and used to drop you off in the opposite neighborhood. They used to say, hey, this guy is from such and such. And then the people would just look and they'll just take off. And of course you will get hurt. Or if not, you will have to run for your life. But it was very dangerous, because I seen a lot of my homies get stabbed, and and it was very unprofessional.
So that happened a few times to myself as well. They were just left in a certain neighborhood, and the gang was told that we were there. And basically we knew, that there were certain cops that were worse than others, that would beat us up real bad and then let us go.
We never got to the bottom of the Rampart scandal. We to this day don't know how many officers in the Rampart division were involved. We don't know how many knew of the illegal activities, including supervisors who didn't come forward. We don't know the extent to which there was similar illegality in other places. Remember, what we're talking about here is police officers planting evidence to frame innocent people and then lying in court to gain convictions. I know from what officers told me of similar instances that have never come to light. How many of these is what nobody knows.
My opinion is not all cops are dirty. When I chose to do my stuff, I chose to break the law. They chose to enforce the law. But now I choose to abide by the law. But that's my take on that, That's my take on that.
In some ways, I feel we should expect the impossible from the police. I think we need, because they are people with guns who can arrest us, we need to hold them up to extremely high standards. And we don't always. We're willing to look the other way when they break the rules sometimes, and we're willing to let them get away with stuff we shouldn't let them, because we just assume that, somehow it's all going to work out and they're only going to pick on the bad guys and all this stuff. And so I think we should expect more from the police than we do. And we should expect the impossible. We should expect them to be perfect. And they will never be, but that'll help us be vigilant in how we approach policing.
Not long after I wrote my report, I was sitting in my office at the University of Southern California, and an officer came into my door, and he was in full uniform, gun, badge, and all, and he said, "Professor, can I talk to you?" Of course, my first thought was that something had happened to one of my children, and he sat down, much like where you're sitting now, and he told me about some blatantly illegal things that were going on out of his precinct. And he said he didn't know what to do about it. He wanted to know who could he tell where he wouldn't get disciplined for not having reported it previously, and who could he tell anonymously so that the next time he was in the field he wouldn't be in danger. He was afraid that officers wouldn't protect his back if he was known as the snitch. I said, under the way the Los Angeles City Charter is written and the police procedures are written, there is no one who you can tell who can give you immunity from being disciplined for what you not reporting it in the past, or anonymity. And I picked up the phone while he was sitting there, and I called the then Inspector General, Jeff Eglash. And by chance I reached him on the phone, and I said, is there anyone who he can tell where it'll be anonymous and also where he won't be disciplined for not having come forward previously? And Jeff confirmed what I said. There was no one there. Without that kind of whistleblower protection, there's no way to break the code of silence.
When you look at the whole Rampart scandal story involving Ray Perez, he played a very significant role in helping to change the culture of the LAPD. I know some people who, police officers, if they heard me say that, they'd be like, oh, you're crazy, you're nuts. How can you say that this guy played a part? But it's true, because this stuff was going around, and it has been going around for a long time. Things that would shock you if you really knew the whole story as to what occurred. But history will hopefully show that with Ray Perez and the whole Rampart scandal, that there were things that had to be opened up, that people had to open their eyes up about law enforcement, how law enforcement can be the greatest thing or it could be the worst thing.